Every revolution starts in the minds of the people. Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today, I'm very pleased to have as my guest Mike Bedenbaugh. He's a Navy veteran, historic preservationist, political analyst, and author of a new book, Reviving Our Republic, 95 Theses for the Future of America. This book is grounded in lessons throughout American history and proposes 40 actionable reforms aimed at making a U.S. government that truly works for the people. Mike is also a community leader and a podcast host with a podcast of the same name, Reviving Our Republic, and he empowers the average citizen to take action with his book as the blueprint. Mike, so glad to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to get to some of the information in your book, but before that, I noticed that, this issue that we've been talking about here on the show, which is the foreign policy towards Venezuela, the attacks on Venezuelan narco-terrorist boats. And I'm going to quote you from a recent interview. You've said something deeper is very wrong here. We're normalizing things that should never be normal. Boats and the people driving them blown apart in the Caribbean with zero evidence shown to the public. This is a poison. A free nation can't survive under this kind of stress. So, Mike, the administration says, look, the Congress has delegated the authority to us to designate groups as terrorists, and we're just defending Americans. What's wrong with that response?
Well, it just astonishes me that people who call themselves conservatives just believe whatever the government tells them. And now it appears that our executive assumes he is the government. It's the foundation of this system, of the system that we live in, assumed one thing: power corrupts. So you put up checks and balances to ensure that power can be mitigated and kept in control and not go off the rails, because our founders, our architects of our nation, understood the slippery slope of how power corrupts and how it centralizes, and it goes to the natural state of human beings, which is authoritarianism. Thousands of years, our people, human beings, lived in authoritarian societies. We have an amazing system that was an experiment in self-rule. And how do we do that? And what we see now is people not understanding how fragile that is. And when an administration can just blow things up and say he's protecting us, it's a bellwether on what type of nation we're going to be. And it's really concerning.
I think one of the responses from people, and I've seen this online because I've criticized this action myself, and especially from people maybe who've had family members, sons, daughters, nephews, cousins, parents who've either died or whose lives have been destroyed by drugs, would say, well, that's all fine and good for American citizens, but the drug dealers don't deserve due process and all these fancy things that you're talking about. What's wrong with that?
Well, it's an emotional response, and I feel for people who's been suffering from this, but it's also a very shallow and ill thought out response, because if we want to deal with the drug trafficking, blowing people up on little boats in the Caribbean is not dealing with the drug trafficking, because obviously if these are drug boats, they're trying to leave somewhere and go somewhere. So wherever these little boats are loading things up, why isn't that being blown up? Where is this coming from? None of this is thought out. And what it appears to be, the administration is leveraging that emotional response from people. When I do videos on this, I have so many people, what do you have against killing narco-terrorists? Well, how do you know they are? I mean, what is the proof and evidence that they are? And it looks like a bad chapter of some sort of video game that we're watching, and this is a complicated issue, and there's ways to deal with it. And I just found out today, in fact, I'm doing a video on it, that they had people in the Pentagon dealing with some that had been captured, and what are they doing with them? They wanted to send them to El Salvador and not bring them to America. Why? Because if they brought them to America, they'd have to go before a judge somewhere. And they do not want that to happen. So that shows me there's more to this than what is happening. So my personal theory is it doesn't matter to them what's in the boats. It matters on the emotional response they can get and to ramp up the justification for military action in Venezuela. That's what it looks like. And that puts our men and women and boys, I mean, I'm 64 now, and, these are our children that's going to be sent into a war. This is why the people's representatives determine whether we go to war and not one man.
So, yeah, and that kind of ties into your book. It's called Reviving Our Republic. So,
Yes.
presumably there's something wrong that needs to be revived. Do you see this as symptomatic of what's wrong with the state of the American Republic today?
Absolutely. And I want to be clear, this is not a partisan issue. In my book, Reviving Our Republic, ta-da, we have been slippery sloping into this centralized bureaucratic state over the past 60 years, especially ever since World War II. And the whole book is based on the fact of, when I watched the debate in 2015, the Republican debate, and it looked more like a SmackDown worldwide wrestling event than a real debate. It was just vulgar, insulting, and I realized we had gone to a place that Washington had feared we would. So my study of Washington, I love history. I've studied history all my life, and I base things with a historical perspective about precedents. And so I really spent a lot of time studying Washington's farewell address. And when Washington, our first president, who voluntarily gave up power after 2 terms, left us an owner's manual, a maintenance manual for our republic, in the form of his farewell address. And he lists pages of things that we need to be cognizant of if we're to keep this republic. And it's one of the most brilliant political science essays ever written. And we've forgotten those things. So I took out part of that, dispensed it into the book with policy points, like, the whole thing that a lot of people are familiar with, entangled alliances. We don't need to be involved in entangling alliances. And also false patriotism, elevating emotional patriotism versus true patriotism. And the things he warned us about, it's like watching what's happening now in our public life. So the book just kind of say, listen, here's what we were warned about. Here are ways we can fix it. And I put it out there for folks, and hopefully to inspire people to run for Congress. I used it as my platform when I ran for Congress as an independent. And I hope it just inspires people to say we can have this country work, but it takes work to do it.
What happened after World War II that was a fundamental change?
We became a world power, and and our hegemony spoiled us to think that the world could only work if we ran it. Basically, is what happened. I mean, think about, to take a 36,000 view and just think about our engagement in the world through war, and leading up to World War I and leading up to World War II, we really didn't have a military industrial complex. We didn't have a private sector that made tons of money off of war making. I mean, we had gun manufacturers and all of that, but nothing on the scale of what we had in the 50s. And we defeated on 2 fronts, the worst war to ever be inflicted on human species in the world. And we were able to help defeat it in 4 years. Ever since that's happened, and ever since we built up this machinery to protect us so that never happens again, how many wars have we been able to come in and actually be satisfied and win and do it in 4 years? We haven't. I do not think this system protects us at all. It protects stocks. It protects income from mega corporations who make money off of billion-dollar jet planes. And we need those tools, but we don't need those tools to control how we make policy. And that's the difference. And that's what he warned us about. And that's what we have to be cognizant of.
Now, you're actually a Navy veteran, so you've been out there
Yes.
and on the water, not in the air or ground. So that's a great perspective for all this. Is the problem that there's just too much military all around the world and it's too easy to use it? Or do you think it's a good idea that the United States has this huge military and just shouldn't use it the way it's been used?
You know, Adams once talked about, President Adams talked about when he was looking at our defense in the 18th century, that we're protected by a wall of wood, meaning wooden ships, which is what I'm always prejudiced toward the Navy, because I see the Navy as our ultimate best protector from from invasion or any of those things. We do need a strong military, but we also know now we have the strongest military than 10 times the competitor. But is it really protecting us? So we've jobbed out too much of our decision making to the assumptions that only a military, powerful war machine will protect us. And now I see us within a nation that what is protecting the republic? And it's not the ships, it's not I want to say the Nimitz, I served with the Nimitz, but it's not the aircraft carrier, Gerald Ford aircraft carrier down there. They're not protecting the republic right now. They're pursuing a policy that has not been vetted. But what we need to do to protect the republic is to put limited power back in Washington, to put checks and balances so that power doesn't centralize too much in one office, and start creating systems where people who go to represent us go to Washington, D.C. only to represent us as a service, and then leave and come back to their regular jobs, and put that system back in. I do not believe we can be a world hegemonic power and a liberal democracy, free republic, federal republic at the same time, because the things to protect one are different systems and counter systems that protect the other, being secret state, not let people know where all the bombs are, all those things. And we really, as a people, need to come together and figure out how that works. I think it could work as a free republic, as long as we're cognizant of the fact that we don't have to be a world power to know we can protect ourselves from anybody attacking us. I'm confident we can. We did for all those years, and we still can, but we need to really put that back. We need to put the reins back on it.
So you remind me of another quote from the founding generation, which is James Madison, who he goes through a laundry list of the problems with it, but he concludes by saying, no nation could preserve its liberty in the midst of perpetual warfare. And
That's right.
I think the average person who hears about, maybe people like you and I getting hot and bothered about something happening 6,000 miles away, and they say, what am I going to do about it? And really, what does it have to do with me? That's the government. What does it have to do with the average American that we're involved in all these conflicts all over the world?
I have a hard time relating to that concept because I see it it's such self-evidence that how we exist here in freedom matters how our military power, especially how our children are put in firing lines in other places around the world. The world's a dangerous place. And every other country has their own way of evolving their own governing system. They have their own population, their own trajectory of cultural history that leads them into the type of government that they have, whatever that form of government is. And Washington had some great quotes in his farewell address is, we should not be judgmental basically, in a nutshell, do not be judgmental on other nations' governing systems, but be as independent of that as possible, still allowing as much commerce as possible. And because we can't fix everybody. You know, if someone was to come into America in 1780 during our revolution, they come up into upcountry of South Carolina, they will see a civil war of people killing each other, just like you see in Middle Eastern countries now. Every nation has a way it needs to evolve through its own social compact they need to work out. We can't fix them all. And especially when there's such a profit motive for some folks that's engaged in that. We're a whole lot safer if we don't do it.
So, yeah, I mean, I once read there's a book out there that has all of the inaugural addresses. You know,
Mm.
probably not the most interesting thing in the world for everybody. One time I went and I read through them.
Oh,
And what was
wow.
striking, to back to your point, was that, for this decade, roads and canals were the big issue. And then there was slavery. And then there was, central banking and the currency and all kinds of different issues. But no matter what the president's party was, and no matter what the other issues over the day, they would get to the foreign policy part. They'd say, well, basically the Washington advice that you just quoted, that's been working. So let's not fool with that. And that was just like 100 years
Yeah.
where nobody was interested in going out overseas and getting involved anywhere. What do you think changed at the turn of the 20th century?
I think the myth that neutrality meant isolationism, right? The belief that our staying out of World War One is what helped create the problem of World War One. If we had gotten involved in World War One earlier, not as many people would died, because once we got involved, we pretty much created the armistice. And so then we brought down the troops, and then World War II happened. And we had a lot of people saying, the traditionalists, the conservatives were saying, we do not want to be involved in a European war, listening to Washington. And because Hitler overwhelmed Europe so quickly, people saw that, the powerful that saw opportunity in, this is how we need to be safe. We cannot live, the world's too interconnected for us not to be fully involved. I think that's a flawed philosophy. One, and there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but I'm convinced if we would have resisted, as Woodrow Wilson had wanted to resist going into World War One, if we had resisted being involved in that, then Europe would have ended up going into an armistice potentially that they had been doing for the past 500 years. Many times in Europe, you had the great powers balancing themselves because they knew they couldn't defeat each other. So they just said, okay, here's our frontier. Let's try to keep it tamped down so we don't destroy each other. Well, they pretty much came close to destroying each other in World War One. We upset that balance and gave the opportunity for two nations to so humiliate Germany to the point of where the reaction was World War II. I'm convinced if we wouldn't have gotten involved in World War One, the conditions that led to creation of Hitler wouldn't have been the same. I'm not saying it might not have been, but what created Hitler, what created that reaction, was a direct result of how France and England treated Germany after World War One. And
Yeah,
they were only able to do that because we got involved.
yeah, no, I agree. And I think that a lot of people probably at this distance from World War One don't realize how similar Europe was to the Europe of Washington's day. I mean, the Kaiser was first cousins with both the King of England and the Tsar at the time this
Yeah.
was all happening. This is very much like a family squabble amongst and the Habsburgs were still in power. So you didn't have a country called Poland at the beginning of this war. So it was very much the old European families, doing what they had done, as you said, for hundreds of years. And it would have been an easy one to stay out of. But, we had all this idealism like we're going to save the world and make it safe for democracy. And all we got was
Yeah.
an even worse war.
Well, we did, but we were also it was also a period of time where there was this imperialistic sense of we needed to be able to have conquest around the world. We need to be able to have markets. We need to be able to have control. Because if we remember in 1917, it was just in the previous decade where we had the Spanish American War where we were able to build our first sense of empire. We took the Philippines, right? I mean, when we promised after the Spanish American War we would let the Philippines be independent. Well, then we realized, oh, wait a minute, we don't want you to be independent. So we kept control of it. So we had this sense of, we could be part of the powers out there. We wanted access to China. And there was a lot of powerful people that saw a lot of money in that. And it just tended to be, okay, a lot of people died because we weren't involved. Let's keep that from happening again. Let's get more involved. And it was the wrong decision. And what we're living in now is the ultimate conclusion of that, which tells me it's self-evident. It has to stop.
So, on your book, the subtitle, I assume, is a reference to Martin Luther,
Yeah.
95 Theses. What's the connection there?
Well, I grew up in a Lutheran area. My name Bedenbaugh is a German name. My German ancestors came here in 1752 and they were Lutheran. And I'm a historian, so I love that concept. And I really like the metaphor of a lone person thinking through what is wrong, taking these theses, which is an academic exercise of argument. Here are the things that I think is wrong with specifically the indulgences of a 16th century Catholic Church, nailing them onto a church door, supposedly, that makes public. Here's the things we need to debate. This needs to be questioned. And I appreciate that. I think there's a beauty in that. It's one individual being able to change the world, because that one act changed Europe forever, changed how Christianity was expressed forever. It also created a lot of devastating wars. But I like that analogy of being able, and me sitting here in Prosperity, South Carolina, seeing a corrupted federal republic that is going off the rails, and just coming up with my 95 thesis. And I like that tie-in. I had a lot of people, man, say, dude, you're being too nerdy with this 95 thesis. But, that's just the way I am. And I just, out of those 95 theses are 40 policy points. And I put it out there for people to discuss.
Well, we want people to read the book. And of course, you can't give us all 40 in a podcast interview, but how about one or two or three? Wet our whistle a little bit. What are some of the things you suggest in the book?
Well, let me go on to the breakdown of how there's sections. So out of Washington's farewell address, he had three main things that he was focused on, and I have this book broken into four. Three of them reflect his: political polarization, parties, and false patriotism; fiscal responsibility; and foreign affairs, and how we engage in overseas exploits. I added another one, which Washington wouldn't have been aware of as much at the time, is the corporatization of our society. Mega corporations that have become similar to state actors in how they can control communities, and the collusion of corporate and state actions have compromised our individual liberty, especially economic liberty on local levels. So those are the four sections. So on the political part, I think the biggest thing is taking the careerism out of politics and representation. And, one simple thing that I thought about, and every time I shared it when I was running, everybody, wow, that's a good idea. And that is, since potentially people should have the freedom to give money to candidates, we need to make it to where only people who can vote for a candidate can give them money. Period. If this is about citizens and about we the people, then, and if money can be deemed an expression of voice, which I don't doubt, I don't know, I mean, I can't get into the legalities of that Supreme Court has said that its speech is spending money. I have a hard time with that, but let's just say that's the decision. Then fine. Then only the influence of those who can vote for you can give you money, period. And that will probably take a constitutional amendment. The other thing, and this I think is even more important, is the Citizens United decision put corporate money into politics hidden. And I'm an originalist and I'm a textualist, and I see that decision as a actual logical conclusion of 100 years of precedent in which corporations are treated with personhood, which legally corporations and trusts do have personhood. But what we need to do as people, instead of fussing about Citizens United and pretending we just need to get other Supreme Court justices to decide differently, we just need to say, okay, if that's the rule, then we need to go into the Constitution and differentiate between natural persons, citizens, and artificial personas, corporations, and separate that out as what freedom of speech is about and citizenship. That will fix a lot of the money issues that we have, I think.
All right. Yeah, and I've looked into that a little bit. I think
What did
there
you
might be
find?
another side to that story in that, like, I guess the way I think about it is, well, what is the difference between the various shareholders contributing through a corporation and some pack or whatever group of people just doing it individually? Since it's all, I mean, shareholders or members of any other association could
Yeah.
pool their money
The
theoretically.
right to assemble.
Right. So
Yeah.
what is the distinction here when you talk about the members of a corporation versus the members of some other
Well, I'm not,
association?
yeah. So, you know, this is part of the discussion I think we just need to start having. And I think the issue of personhood is important for us to start. But, the main thesis I had is, okay, fine, all of these are complicated issues, but I really think a lot of people, everybody I talked to agreed with it. You can only, people running for office can only receive money from people who can vote for them. Now, then you have the whole issue of laundering. How do you keep that from happening? People giving them money, and,
Yeah.
it's a complicated thing, but we need to start seriously thinking about this and determining what moral basis we have in how we govern ourselves. Where is the morality? Where is the character? We have to really have a hard discussion about that, because what's been happening the past 50 years is we slowly in our consumptive society just assume that's someone else's problem, they have to take care of it and they'll figure it out, and we all get in our little silos of what we're comfortable with. But we need to start taking responsibility for this stuff. And so that's my little contribution on that part. The other one, of course, is, term limits, I think, are absolutely, absolutely necessary. The power that representatives and senators can obtain now, we have to limit the power. When the Constitution was written, they couldn't imagine someone representing 30,000 people in the backwoods of South Carolina having the type of power that a representative has now, representing 750,000 people. That needs to be checked a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why we can't have more Congress people. Like, why? It's almost like they want to stay in that little room in there. Now, of course, there's all kinds of corrupt reasons why you'd want to limit the number of congressmen, but I think for the average person, it doesn't occur to them that they're not represented. That, just as you just said, America was a lot smaller when they came up with the present numbers, and I don't even know what it would be, but it would have to be thousands of people to get back to the ratio they had back then as far as who represented you.
Yeah, at the time it was 35,000 per representative. And that would be a Congress of about 35,000 people. So, you know, where is the balance? And right now it's fixed as to a set number of Congress inside. So that 750,000 figure is going to get bigger as our population grows. And when I ran, I saw the power that was able to be accumulated by the gatekeepers to people who get into Congress. You really only know your donors and those that rise to the top that can affect what you're doing. So, what's that number? 200,000, 150,000. I just think it's a discussion we have to have. So, that's one of those elements in there also. Another thing is that when you go into office, whatever time you're there, let's say a House representative, you're there 10 years, you are prohibited from signing on to a 501c4 lobbying organization for that same period of time. So that you don't just take all your relationships that you did at the public trust and turn them into power and money for yourself to line your own pockets when you leave, which is what, right now the House Representatives and the Senate is a green room for another job.
Yeah.
Money, wealth, and influence. And we just have to stop that. And it can be. The rules can be set up for that. But it can't unless everybody rises up and says, this is what we expect. This is what we demand.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like a fascinating read. I'm certainly going to post a link to it on our show notes page. Where else can people find you, Mike, and the work that you do?
Well, I have a page, revivingourrepublic.com. From there, you can see the podcast that I'm doing, the channel, and also the book, access to the book. It's on Amazon. Reviving Our Republic is there. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, it was in the top 20 for political and civic history. So, yay, it's starting to get some traction. And I've got some great reviews. But on Reviving Our Republic, I have a lot of other things where people could look into. I have blogs on how the Constitution works, how it should work. So I welcome everybody to come and look at it and help be part of this movement that I'm confident we can make the difference we need to make.
Sounds great, Mike. And again, we'll certainly push out the book and on my Twitter. And hopefully you'll be able to come back and let us know how it's going.
I look forward to it anytime, Tom. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.